Welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to show you how to export this bodysuit pattern from CLO into Adobe Illustrator to prepare for printing on a plotter or home printer. Although CLO has its own interface for exporting ready-to-print patterns as PDFs, exporting to Adobe Illustrator first offers better control over line weights, character styles, and layout formats, and will produce an easier-to-follow and more professional-looking printed pattern. Check out my Patreon in the description below for the project files used in this tutorial, as well as a written step-by-step guide, project ideas, and one-on-one support for advancing your skills. Let's get started. The only thing I need to do in CLO before exporting the pattern as a PDF to Adobe Illustrator is make sure that all of my patterns are aligned on a grid along their grain line. So to do that, I'm going to use the Transform Pattern tool, or the A hotkey, and I'm going to right-click patterns one at a time and choose Rotate, Reset along grain direction. And that will make sure that my patterns are directly up and down. So just to check to make sure I've gotten all of my patterns along their own grain line, I'm going to show the grain line by going to the 2D display options. Under this panel right here, I'm going to just choose show grain line. And so I can kind of see, okay, well, most of these are pretty good. You might want to double check. This one, however, I can see it is off grain. So I'm going to right click again, rotate, reset along grain direction, and then I think that's good. When I export as a PDF, it will export the layout that I see in my 2D window. So even if I have gone to print layout and pressed play and made a nice organized layout, it will still only export what is appearing right here. It's good to have some sort of organization, but ultimately we're going to rearrange things in Illustrator anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Now we're ready to save the file as an Adobe PDF. To do that, I'm going to go to the File menu, choose File, Export, Adobe PDF. Now I just need to find a place on my computer where I can find it again and name my file, and choose Save. When this window pops up, I recommend resetting your options and then exporting as is. Although you may have drafted in inch scale, it really does need to be in millimeter scale in order to import accurately into Adobe Illustrator. There are ways to correct that scale later, but it's easiest just to import as is. As far as these options, I leave all of these checked and then I delete lines that I don't want when I'm in Illustrator. If you've got images like fabric texture or graphics, usually the graphics placement will stay the same. The image texture or the fabric texture I delete when I get to Illustrator anyway. And then you can choose to check things like pattern names if you think you're going to get lost, but if you drafted these patterns, I usually remember what they are. I think the most handy option in here is the buttons and buttonholes because it's really great to have that in your final pattern. All of these other ones, I find they just get annoying and in the way when they're in Illustrator. So once you are happy with these settings, go ahead and click OK. Now I am in Adobe Illustrator and all I've done is open my pattern and this is what appears. When I explain these tools to you, I'm going to assume you have a baseline knowledge of how Adobe Illustrator works. And I'm also going to mostly use hotkey commands because depending on your Adobe Illustrator layout, for example, mine is on Workspace Essentials Classic, all of your icons are going to be in a completely different place. The first tool we're going to use is the selection tool, and I'm going to just use the V hotkey. And this is the tool that's, I can select large things all at once, and I'm going to use it to select my entire workspace by using Control or Command A. And I want to change all of the fill and the stroke to default, so I'm just going to press the D hotkey. And now you might think, oh my God, all my patterns are gone. And they're not. All I did is I changed the default fill option is white. And so we just need to go ahead and make that none. And the key command for that is the slash key. Not the backslash key, but the slash key. And that will go ahead and change my fill to none. And now my patterns are visible again. Now with the selection tool still activated, I'm going to click on half of my patterns and delete them. It is good practice to keep the same half of the pattern that you're going to be using. So for example, I'm only deleting the left side. You may have noticed that when I was deleting these patterns, it was selecting the entire box. That's because for some reason, CLO exports like an outline around the entire pattern, like a stroke that's right here. So I want to go ahead and delete that. If I click on it, of course, with the selection tool, it will delete the whole pattern because all of these lines are all grouped together. So I'm going to go to the direct selection tool, which is the A hotkey. And this icon over here, I'm just going to click and drag around the border of my artboard and press delete once to, delete whatever I selected, and then twice to delete that entire line. And now that border is gone, and it no longer is, I can see that and move my pieces individually. You can take this time to also delete lines that you don't want. For example, when you export, it gives you the option to keep notches and baselines in the same option window. So I actually don't want this baseline. And then, of course, to select it, I can either, get into this group and delete it with the selection tool, or I can just use the direct selection tool, grab the line I don't want, and then press delete twice. The first time I press delete, it, of course, deletes that line. And then the second time, it deletes the remaining points. Of course, if you only wanted to delete a line anywhere, you would just press once to delete that line. All right, I'm ready to label these patterns. To do that, I'm going to use the T hotkey, and I'm going to go ahead and click and drag a text box and then start typing my text. Of course, to adjust the size or font of my text, I'm just going to either drag to select all or Control or Command A to select all. And then in my character window, I have the option to change my font, as well as the size of my font. And if this window isn't popping up, you can always find it by going to Window and then choosing Properties. I also like to center my text because I think it looks nice. Now, of course, to move your text around, you go to the selection tool, and then you have control over the placement within your pattern. Now I want to add my green lines to my pattern. To do that, I'm now going to use the backslash hotkey to activate the line tool, which is over here, line segment. And now I can just click anywhere on my pattern, and it'll give me a length option. For now, I'm going to type 5 inches and then angle 90 so that it is aligned to the grid that I already lined all my patterns to, and okay. Now I just created a line, but it has no line weight, and it also has no color to it, so I can't actually see it. So I'm going to go ahead and set it to the default fill and stroke settings and just press D. Now I can open up my stroke window, which for me is right here, but if you can't find it, again, that's window, and then you would just select stroke, and then it should pop up. And I like to change my grain lines to 2 points because I think they're a little bit easier to find. And then also add the arrowheads right here in the stroke window. I just want to add an arrowhead on both sides because that indicates that it is a grain line. If I want to change the length of the grain line, I'm going to use the direct selection tool. And, right now I just pressed the A hotkey, selected it, and it's still moving it around. That's because when I created the line, it selected the whole line. I just have to click somewhere else. And now I can click on one side and then stretch it. And just like in CLO3D, it's offering me a pink guideline to make sure that I stay on the same angle, and I can also hold shift to lock it to that axis. Once I have my grain line and my text, I'm going to go ahead and use my selection tool, or the V hotkey, and hold shift to select both of them. And then I'm just holding Alt. On a Mac, it's going to be Option, and clicking and dragging, and I'm just going to drag this to all of my patterns to copy it over. I'm going to have to maybe rescale some grain lines, but I'll do that in just a little bit. And then once they're there, I can change my text so that everything's labeled correctly, and then adjust my grain lines to fit in the pattern. Now, before I go any further, once I like my labeling and my grain lines, I need to group them with the pattern, or else if I move the pattern, it doesn't move altogether. So to do that, I'm just in the selection tool, or the V hotkey. I'm just going to click and drag so that I select my grain line, my text, and my pattern. And then I'm going to do Control or Command G to group them together. Once it's grouped, you can see I can click and move, and the whole shebang will move with it. So I'm just going to go ahead and group all of these. Okay, my pattern pieces are ready to go. Now I have to make sure that my artboard is the size that I need for it to be printed, however I'm going to print it. I'm going to show you two ways to do this. The first way is to prepare for printing on a plotter. So to do that, I'm going to go to my artboard window. So right here, artboards, or window artboards is how I would find it. And I'm going to click on this icon right here, and that is going to bring up the edit options for my artboard. So width I have right now 42. That's just whatever CLO decided it fit on when I exported it. You know, these patterns took up about that much space in the 2D window. But my plotter actually is 42 inches wide. And I want to give it some margins just in case. So I'm going to change the width to 41 inches. The height I'm going to leave as is. I will adjust that in just a little bit to make sure I'm not wasting any paper. But that looks good. And I'm going to click OK. Whatever your plotter width is, just make it 1 inch smaller than that. Now I can go ahead and arrange these patterns. Something that I like to do is, just select all and then use the align options in my property window to align them all to the top edge or to the side edge. I will warn you that I find that when I do this, I want to make sure that my align is to the artboard. But when I do this, sometimes it wants to cut off the margins. And so I just kind of, even if I do this, I still scoot it away from the edge just a little bit. But now it's just a matter of using the selection tool to click and drag to create the most economic print layout. Unfortunately, I don't know of a way to use like auto arrange like you have in CLO in the print layout layout section. So if somebody knows how to do that, though, write in the comments and then I will update this video to reflect that. All right, that's not bad. I want to go ahead and I want to make my artboard as small as it can be so I'm not wasting any paper when I go to print this. And I'm going to use a little bit of a different tool. I'm actually going to use the artboard tool, and the hotkey for that is Shift O. And now I can arrange the size of my artboard because I've already set it to be 41 inches wide. I don't want to adjust that, but I'm just going to click and drag this bottom edge to make sure my paper is not as large. And now this is a pretty good size. All I have to do is file menu and save, and we are ready to print on the plotter. Now I'm going to show you how to prepare the pattern to be printed on a home printer, so tileable 8.5 by 11 or 11 by 17 or the like. To do that, we're going to go back to the artboard window, and I'm going to choose, just click that same tiny button again, and this time I'm going to make my width, the width of my paper, minus 1/2 inch for margins, and then the same for the height of my paper minus 1/2 inch for margins. So for an 8.5 by 11 paper, I've done 8 by 10.5, and then go ahead and click OK. And that made one artboard, so that's one piece of paper. To make the rest of them, I'm going to click this tiny little button over here, and that will continue to add more artboards. I kind of have to just guess how many I need. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's start with 8 just to see what that does. And, it kind of laid them out in a really annoying way that isn't going to work for us. So to fix this, I'm going to actually now press this button, which looks like a little zigzaggy arrangement tool. And when I click that, it gives me an option which says columns and spacing. It looks like I could probably fit on 3 columns, and spacing I want to be 0 inches so that when one pattern ends, the next begins. And I don't need to move my artwork with artboard. Now I can click OK. All right, that looks pretty good. I'm just going to add one more artboard. So I have 9, and it saved those settings, which was actually very nice. And now I can use my selection tool to move my patterns around and so that they fit nicely onto the paper. It's nice to make them so they overlap, you know, as few pieces of paper as possible. So I, you know, if I can make it fit kind of in this edge without having to tape multiple pieces of paper, it makes a nicer pattern. Like for this one example, I can just choose to turn that way. And that looks pretty, nope, nope. Yep, that looks pretty good. And now I can just save the pattern as it is now. And when I open it in Adobe Acrobat, you can see that it's aligned in different pages. So now when this prints, there's not going to be a border to connect these back together. You can add a border around every page, but I like to just find where my lines intersect when I'm pinning them together, and I find that I don't need a border when I'm working. Of course, if you're exporting for somebody else to put together, then you'd want to do a little bit more work. But as for me, this is what I do, and it seems to work great. Thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments.